Joining us from Toledo, Ohio is Amy Klinger. She is a mom and the co-founder and director of programs for the Educators School Safety Network. We want to learn more about your organization in just a moment, but I want to share with you this one headline from the Connecticut Sunday Bulletin. These shootings are coming to your town. Of course, we all remember what happened at Sandy Hook in December of 2012. What are schools not doing that they should be doing to protect students?
Well, I think schools need additional resources. They need additional support, and most specifically, they need training. And I think we're making a mistake sometimes when we're investing in lots of stuff. We're buying metal detectors and fencing and radios and things like that, but we're not investing in the people who are going to be using those things. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we're making, is we're not investing in the educators who are going to be responding and preventing those events.
You wrote the book back in 2009, In Search of Safer Schools. Teachers and administrators with guns, is that one answer?
No, there are a lot of answers. There's a lot of answers and things that we can do. Prevention is a huge answer. Training, getting our teachers to be empowered to know what to do and to be able to identify people of concern and be able to move beyond just a law enforcement orientation of school safety. Those things are really critical. There's lists and lists of things that we can do, but we have to start a conversation with that foundational belief that everyone has, which is no kid should be dying in a school from any sort of thing, whether it's gun violence or something else. And so we really have to start from that foundational belief that every single person has and build up from there.
As you look at the case involving 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, clearly had come from a family that was broken. His mom passed away back in November, living with friends, and he was on the radar of local officials, but clearly there was a breakdown between local officials and the FBI. So where were the mistakes made?
Well, it's too early to really be able to say a lot of that because so much of it is still coming out. But what we see when we look historically at a lot of these incidents of violence is there were indicators, there were warnings, and we weren't necessarily picking up on them because we're not coordinating and collaborating. Law enforcement sometimes works in a vacuum, schools sometimes work in a vacuum, and oftentimes there isn't an education voice in it. But I think the most critical piece is threat assessment. We're not doing threat assessment in schools the way that we could be doing it because we know that it works, but we have to do the hard work of training people, setting up the teams, creating policies and procedures for that, and then we have to consistently do it all the time.
And when you say threat assessments, what's involved in that?
Threat assessment really has three key components where we're identifying who are individuals we should be concerned about, who are at risk for violence against themselves or others. So we identify those individuals based on the behaviors and the different things, different threats and things that are coming to us. Then we assess how concerned should we be? What can we do? How bad is it? What are some of the indicators that we see? And then finally we manage. It's not a way to kick kids out of school. It's a way to provide supports and interventions and pick these people up on their path to violence much sooner than when they're actually implementing their path to violence. And so it's really critical to be able to do all three of those things, not just for the next shooter, but for the next kid that's at risk for suicide or risk-taking behaviors or violence of other kinds. So threat assessment solves and gives schools a mechanism to pick up a lot of these individuals and provide support and interventions a lot sooner. It's not the only thing that we can do, but it's a huge piece of what we can do.
And after Sandy Hook, where 20 students and 6 faculty members and staff members were killed, many people thought that was going to be the tipping point, at least to begin having a debate or a conversation on gun legislation. We had that for a while, nothing changed. And then with the debate over bump stocks with regard to what happened in Las Vegas, Nevada, that was part of the debate, nothing has changed. With regard to schools and your area of expertise, will anything change on school campuses around the country?
Well, I hope so. I hope that this becomes a moment where we begin to have conversations that are constructive of what are the things we can agree on, what are the things that we can do. Because, you know, guns are clearly a huge issue in this, but we have kids that die in schools and kids that are injured and where schools are unsafe that have things that are beyond guns. We have medical problems, we have all kinds of other issues that come in from the community, we have, you know, weather and severe events, all those sorts sorts of things are still safety issues. But clearly the gun concern is one of the very first ones. And the problem comes if we just have this very dichotomous conversation that the only thing we're going to have is no guns or all guns, and we're not willing to talk about anything else. Because really the underlying factors are, again, investing in our educators, getting educators to be empowered, having them have a seat at the table, because your responders to these events are the educators. As much as law enforcement does the best they can to be there as quickly as they can, the people that are dying on the front lines, the people that are dealing with both the prevention and response are educators, and they're the ones that are receiving the least amount of training and support.
We're dividing our phone lines among educators, parents and students, law enforcement, and all others. We'll get to your calls later in the program. But Amy Klinger, why is this your issue, and specifically, what is the Educator School Safety Network?
Well, I have 28 years in public education, primarily as a building principal. And I really came to see early in the mid-2000s when I was working as a principal and my son became a volunteer fireman. And the discrepancy between the amount of training he received at a very young age, very early in his career in emergency response, and the lack of training that educators had, that I had as a building principal, was very startling and very stark. That I was a first responder, because when something happened in my school, I needed to respond until emergency responders showed up. And that lack of training really spurred me on to realize that educators didn't have a voice. We didn't have a seat at the table. This is not a law enforcement issue. It's not fair to say law enforcement needs to fix this and protect us and do everything for us. We have to be empowered to make decisions, to be able to prevent violence and to respond to it. And educators need to be intimately involved in that. Not just one administrator, but every single person in a school, from the students to the teachers to the support staff. Everybody needs to be trained and empowered to respond every single day to the sort of events that we have. Not in this vigilant, scary way, but empowered to respond to whatever it might be. A kid that has a seizure, a non-custodial parent that comes in and is being aggressive. All of those different things that occur in a school, everybody needs to be empowered to know how to prevent and how to respond to them. And that lack of training is really what spurred me on to become a training organization.
The Sun Sentinel website in Fort Lauderdale indicating that Stoneman Douglas High School will be closed tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And Amy Klinger, they posted some video from a demonstration that took place yesterday, using this as a marking point for these young people to call for action. I want you to listen and watch what happened and get your reaction.
I have watched in Tallahassee for the last 2 years while our legislature has considered gun expansion bill after gun expansion bill. Open carry, concealed weapon expansion, guns in churches, and incredibly, we are about to take up on Tuesday a bill that will allow more guns on school campuses.
I'm 17, but in a matter of days, I have aged decades. Our childhood is gone because that man, despite being tipped off to the FBI multiple times, was able to legally purchase an AR-15. He was able to legally purchase that semi-automatic rifle and come into my school and slaughter 17 of my people. Because of these gun laws, people that I know, people that I love have died, and I will never be able to see them again.
That full video is available on the Sun Sentinel website. And a related headline from USA Today, Amy Klinger, we will be the last mass shooting as Florida students want to be a tipping point in the gun debate. My question, where does this go next?
Well, you certainly can see the fear and the frustration that's reflected in students who are coming to school and are fearful for what's going to happen. And some of that is because we have not provided the resources and the training that people are coming to school and saying, what are you going to do to protect me? And we're saying, well, we're going to make it like a prison. That's not a school. A school is not a prison. And so I think we have to come to this tipping point where we are looking at a multi-factored, comprehensive solution that does not just address one particular concern, but that addresses all the different aspects of violence prevention and climate and culture and all of the different things that make a school a safe, supportive environment. And we have our students telling us that they don't feel that their school is a safe and supportive environment. And we have an obligation to change that.
From the Miami Herald, this headline, a minute-by-minute breakdown on exactly what happened, and from a Florida judge in the child welfare court deemed him stable even though the shooter had cut himself and displayed Nazi symbols, and there had been more than a dozen times in which police had gone to his place of residence to investigate him. So another breakdown in terms of what could have been done, even when the president says if you see something, say something. Some people did, and nothing happened.
And that's certainly, there's a systemic failure here. But I think it's important to note, if we go back in history and look at at some of these past events, that's happened before. We have kids who are begging us to stop them. They are engaging in behaviors of concern. They're saying things, they're doing things, and we don't have a system in place to pick those kids up and provide support. And it's not just a punitive notion of trying to catch them and do something terrible to them or punish them. It's trying to provide the necessary supports and intervention. And so again, it goes to that sort of patchwork of solutions of all of these different things that we need to be looking at and the different ways that we need to be providing support for kids instead of just one simple solution that makes us feel better because we've done this one thing and then we walk away. This is a systemic, sustained problem. It's not going to go away because one person gets the thing that they think they need. It's going to be solved when we have done the hard work of looking at all the different components that go into it, both in terms of guns, but also in terms of mental health, in terms of training, research. All of those different components have to be put together, pieced together to form a comprehensive solution instead of just one thing that we want to we want a quick fix and then we want to move on to the next thing. This is a sustained endeavor. This is not a quick fix.
Our guest is a mother, an educator, and the co-founder of the Educators School Safety Network, Amy Klinger, who's joining us from Toledo. You can get more information by going on to eschoolsafety.org. Calvin is joining us from Miramar, Florida, also an educator. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I'm sick and tired of hearing all this psychobabble every time a white male commits mass murder. Blacks are thugs, Muslims are terrorists, but the white male, always without fail, mental illness. This is completely sickening. The white male has a psychotic obsession with guns, firearms, and explosives, and a propensity for mass murder. 99% of the mass murders are white males. Go and look at him. This is psychobabble.
Thank you, Calvin. Amy Klinger.
Well, I guess, again, we need to go back to the notion of being able to identify, assess, and manage individuals of concern. And it's not always a mental health issue. There are clearly issues that we need to talk about that are disciplinary. There are clearly issues that we need to talk about where kids need to be responsible for what they have said or what they have done or the threats that they have made. So clearly there is both the support role and also the punitive or disciplinary or that sort of piece that needs to go with this, because we see so many threats where kids say something or they post something on social media that's awful or very threatening, and then they want to come back and say, oh, that was a joke, I was just kidding. And so we have to deal with that whole mentality as well, that this is not an acceptable way to entertain yourself. It's not an acceptable way to act out. And so we have to deal with all those components, from the mental health piece to the person that is just acting irrationally or acting irresponsibly. They have to be held responsible for those behaviors as well.
And some headlines from the Florida Sun Sentinel: be kind, be present. Below that, crews had a long list of issues at school, and the family that allowed them to live with him, the Sneed family in South Florida, opened their home to a monster. It was a friend of Nicholas Cruz who had asked his parents to have him stay in the home, and he was there as late as Wednesday, the day of the shooting. Let's go to Janice joining us from Odenton, Maryland, a parent. Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, please don't cut me off. I would like to say that we received a letter, all the parents received a letter on Thursday from the superintendent trying to, I guess, quell our frustration and being terrified of what has happened in the news. So let me summarize the letter. Basically, the letter stated, well, we have security measures in place. The security measures are laughable. What the security measures consist of is the doors are locked. You have to be buzzed in. Okay, so you get buzzed in. You have to go to the office, but you don't have to go to the office. There's no police officer, no resource officer, no one standing at the door to make sure that you go directly to the office. So that is operating on an honor system. You could go anywhere else in the building and no one is looking or seeing what you're doing, what you have. So this is not a proper security measure. We need increased funding for school security. I am terrified every day when I send my kids to school.
Thank you. We'll get a response. Amy Klinger.
Well, I think that you raised some valid concerns. I don't know the situation in your particular district, but there are a lot of violence prevention strategies that need to be implemented, but they don't necessarily involve purchasing more stuff. They involve policies and procedures like strategic supervision, where we place our staff, how we train them to engage, how we are able to engage with visitors, what sort of visitor sign-in procedures do we have, how do we screen people when they're coming into the building. You know, we have buzzer systems, but if the only thing that's happening with the buzzer is you push the buzzer, I push the buzzer inside, and you walk in, that's not a screening. That buzzer system didn't do us any good if we're not using those. And that's really indicative of part of the problem. We purchase stuff, but then we don't train people in how to use it effectively. So we have this expensive buzzer system, but it's not being used effectively in many places. So anytime that you have those kind of policies and procedures of what does our supervision look like? How many people, you know, we have 200 kids standing around in the lobby before the beginning of school, and maybe we only have one teacher or one person supervising. And so we have to be able to provide schools with the resources to be able to provide adequate supervision, have the teachers where they need to be interacting with students, not just a security like we have a security guard at the mall, but instead that we have people that know these kids, that are involved with these kids, that they can pick up on these signs. There is someone that students can disclose to, that they can say, I'm concerned about this, or someone said this, or someone, and clearly that's getting better, but we have big disclosure problems in a lot of schools where kids know things and they're not telling anyone. And one of the major reasons they don't tell anyone is they don't think we're going to do anything about it. So we have to have systems and policies in place, not just an anonymous tip line, but other ways that kids can disclose and discuss what it is that they're seeing on social media, what people are saying, that sort of a thing. So there's a lot of those violence prevention measures that can be happening in schools, but you have to provide schools with the training to be able to do that and the resources to be able to implement them. It's a lot easier to just plunk down some money and buy a metal detector or hire a security guard to stand there, but that's not an effective way to systematically change the safety concerns and the climate and culture in a school.
And of course,
that's tougher work. That's harder.
I'm just going to make the point that the shooting in Parkland, Florida began outside before the shooter then moved inside. But I want to go back to the issue of training. How do you balance the training to make it first age appropriate and also not intimidating to the students, but also effective?
Well, and that's really an important point. The training needs to be developmentally appropriate. It needs to be based on the age of the students and what sort of skills and capabilities that you want them to have. And it should not just be active shooter training. As much as this is a horrific, tragic event that has ignited this national conversation, it is not statistically the most likely crisis event to happen in schools. Schools experience medical emergencies every day, bomb threats, all kinds of different things that are happening. So the training for staff and students needs to be more than just active shooter training. And one of my fears in response to this event is that we'll continue to have this really heavy emphasis on active shooter training. And then you have a child that has a medical emergency, goes into cardiac arrest, and no one knows how to use the AED, no one knows how to do CPR, no one knows the protocol for getting the emergency responders in, because all we've ever done is trained for this active shooter event. So again, when you train people and you empower people to make decisions about how to respond to crisis events, you are making them safer from a lot of different events, not just an active shooter. Even though that's currently the one that has captured our attention, we have to move beyond that and really be able to look at all of the different threats that kids face. I mean, we track threats every single day in schools, and they are not all gun threats. There are threats of other kinds of violence, violence that comes in from the community into the school, bomb threats that are made, suicide threats that are made, assaults, all kinds of those things that are occurring in schools that we need to train and empower the people in the school to be able to prevent those, identify those potential vulnerabilities and risks, and be able to respond. And so just purchasing something may make us feel better on the surface, but it hasn't made our school any safer. So we've got to get away from that. I'm just going to buy something, show it to the public, and make everyone think that everything's good now. We have to train those people. They need to know how to use it. We go into schools where they have very expensive entry systems and no one knows how to use them correctly.
If you're listening on C-SPAN Radio or on SiriusXM, the POTUS channel, we're talking with Amy Klinger and her organization. She is the co-founder of the Educators School Safety Network. We're talking about school safety and the crisis response in Florida. By the way, if you want to go to the organization's website, there's a state-by-state look at where school safety threats are, and also pointing out that it's available on the website, an analysis, I should say, of the U.S. states with high rates of school-based violent threats and incidents, and it's from 2016 through 2017. Let's go to Joseph in Apoca, Florida. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Okay, so I'm a retired bilingual counselor from New York City, and I'm also a veteran. I'd like to make a quick comment, first of all, about the great need I see for more counselors in the schools, well-trained counselors. I was able to receive a master's degree from Hunter College, City University of New York, with 30 graduate credits. And I think that we need an emergency funding to train well-trained counselors, get them into the schools as soon as possible, and give them some independence also. I say that because in my experience, frequently administrators will use counselors for clerical duty, etc. We need trained counselors in there doing good work, groups, etc., etc.
Thank you. Amy Klinger, is that a solution as well?
Oh, that certainly can be one part of the solution. It's certainly a piece, because we do have, the symptomology here is we have kids who feel very disenfranchised, very disconnected from the school. No one knows them, no one talks to them, or they feel very isolated. I mean, all those different sort of things. And clearly that's a piece of it. But we have to also remember that counselors and those sort of things will benefit all kids, not just the next kid that we're worried about as a potential shooter. So we have to remember we have a lot of kids with a lot of needs who aren't going to ever manifest themselves in this awful, terrible way, but their needs and their suffering is still true as well. So I think it's really kind of coming to that sort of center where we're providing appropriate supports and interventions, but we're also holding kids accountable and responsible for their behavior, for the things that they say and the things that they do. So it's really, again, we want to come to more of a center where we're trying to look at a comprehensive approach to school safety instead of a reactionary one, that we are instead trying to be much more preventative. Instead of spending all of our time figuring out or talking about what we're going to do when the worst thing happens, we could be spending equal amounts of time and energy and resources preventing those things from happening and identifying both vulnerabilities within the school, empowering our teachers to identify those, and then using threat assessment to really be able to find and pick up on those those kids that have real issues that need to be addressed.
Marjorie is next. She is a parent from Indianapolis. Thank you for waiting. Good morning.
Thank you for taking my call. My feeling is words, words, words. We've gone from thoughts and prayers to mental health. May I suggest that mental health is not exclusive to the United States, and yet other countries don't seem to have the problem. And my suggestion is that rather than laws and whatever they're all talking about, that they might consider putting an amendment, a new amendment on the Constitution banning guns in general. That's my thought.
Amy Klinger, your response.
Well, you know, you started out saying words, 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 and I think that's a really, that's something we need to look at. Who are saying those words? I mean, we don't have educators very heavily involved in this. You know, if you look at the coverage and the people that you have on TV, the talking heads talking about and bringing up really relevant points, I'm not faulting those people, but you don't see an education voice. No one is talking about the unique situations and concerns of educators and what educators are trying to do, because you've given them a tall order of all the things they're supposed to be and do. Be parents, be law enforcement, be security, be instructors, be social and emotional supports. I mean, all those things that we're asking teachers to do, but yet we're not really having a conversation with them about what do you need, what do you want, how do you think this would work. We have a lot of talking at schools, but we're not talking with schools a whole lot. And I think that we need to shift that focus so that educators have a seat at the table and that we're listening to the needs of educators. And that's one of the reasons that we became an organization, is there was not an education perspective. And we also need to move into research and looking at what we know to be true instead of being, well, this is my experience, or this is an anecdote, or this is what I believe. We need to critically examine. We are a research and training organization because we want to be very apolitical and very objective in looking at what is really happening and what are the situations that educators are really being forced to deal with, and have that be the start for that conversation.
For Amy Klinger joining us in Toledo, Steve is next, Provincetown, Massachusetts, also calling our line for parents. Good morning.
Hi. Yeah, I have been trying to coordinate with Veterans Affairs authorities, senators like Senator Rubio, Schumer, Collins, Angus King, a couple others, to put together, honestly, I mean, with all due respect, we have all these returning veterans. They've been under fire. You can't take a teacher and make him able to respond correctly under fire. Most people don't know whether they have that in them or not till it happens. But I think for maybe $200,000 a year, you could have guys who need a good job protecting people. That's what they've done, who are trained in the use of weaponry and have been under fire or near it enough to know they're not going to pee their pants and dive under a table or run away, because let's face it, that's what happens an awful lot when people are afraid for their life. And you know, to have a teacher at the blackboard trying to teach somebody, and then suddenly, you know, it's going to be carrying a weapon on his back and a flak jacket. So I think we could combine these two. Congress could perhaps help the schools finance if they were not able to. And I think you'd have to have somebody at a monitoring system watching cameras around the school to see if anybody was coming in with something odd or being buzzed in, as you say, with a weird-looking pack on their back or whatever. But short-term, I think we could combine the two, and we would have actual trained warriors who you might not want that thought, but, I mean, who would be at the school. I would send my kid to that school and say...
Thank you, Steve. I'll stop you there, and we'll get a response. Amy Klinger.
Well, you're going to need a lot of them because you have a lot of schools and they're very big. And so when you have a school with 1,000 kids in it, you have one person that is empowered and trained to respond and everybody else is not. That is a recipe for disaster. And I'll take exception a bit with the notion that, people will rise to the level that you've trained them. So if you feel a teacher's not responded appropriately, it's because you haven't trained them appropriately. And I think that we need to really understand the extent to which educators are being asked to do things so far beyond their capabilities and skill sets, not because they aren't capable, but because we haven't trained and empowered them to do so. So, and we're not talking purely about a response. We're talking about training people for prevention and for the ability to be able to identify these threats and to respond to them. And I think, we've seen in many past instances, is it a good idea to have armed law enforcement in a school? I don't have an issue with that, but to say that's the only solution and to say that's the only person that needs to be trained and empowered is ridiculous, because we've had them at past events, and you can't expect one person to be able to protect 2,000 people in a building. You have to train and empower every person to be able to protect themselves, as well as know how to pick up on these warning signs and what to do. So it may make us feel better to say we're just going to put this one person there, but we also have to look at what's happening in that school every day. We have to look at who's in that school every day, give them the resources that they need, not the stuff, not more stuff, not an app, but the resources that they need to be able to do this very, very tough job. And it's not just that one person can come in and now, because you have a trained person with a gun, there are no more threats in that school. There's no more problem in that school. That's not logical. We know that that is just not the case. As much as it might make us feel better, it's not necessarily the magical solution.
And with a half a minute left, Amy Klinger, is there a price tag to all of this nationwide?
Well, I would put out there that training people is significantly cheaper than buying a bunch of stuff that sits around and gathers dust or is used inappropriately or doesn't really, isn't really effective. You want bang for your buck? Invest in your people. Education and schools are a people industry. Let's invest in them, give them the skills and capabilities that they need, and allow them to be able to do the job that they need to do in a safe and supportive manner. And we owe that to our kids. We owe that to our educators. But our kids are not even in this conversation as much as they should be in terms of what's the impact and the cost to our children. We're raising a generation of kids who don't see schools as a safe and supportive place, and we have to change that.
We will conclude on that note. The website is eschoolsafety.org. Our guest, Amy Klinger, she is the co-founder and director of programs for the Educators School Safety Network, joining us from Toledo. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
We'll shift topics and turn our attention to the growing debt and deficit in this country. Joining us in just a moment is Bob Bixby. He is with the Concord Coalition, and we'll look at the $20 trillion debt that is increasing every single minute. Later, Max Richmond is going to be joining us, the president and CEO from the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We are traveling the country on our cities tour, and this week on C-SPAN 2's Book TV and C-SPAN 3's American History TV,